This profile of a dying ship was America's most shocking reminder of our entry into World War II. This is the story of that proud ship and the men who sailed her, and the parallel lives of two officers, one who served aboard and loved her, and one who struck the first blow in the assault that killed her. Two men whose destinies collide in a moment in history that changed the world forever. June 1915, the Brooklyn Navy Yard, New York. The 39th battleship built for the Navy since 1892 is christened the Arizona. Led by Governor Hunt, a delegation of 50 people from Arizona attend the launching. Miss Esther Ross of Prescott, age 17, swings two beribboned bottles, one of champagne and one of Arizona water, and the mighty dreadnought begins its journey into history. Senator Ashurst began his remarks in part, "We today launch a mighty leviathan of the deep, whose mission it shall be to engulf any hostile craft that disturbs or threatens our American civilization." So far, the Arizona has cost $7,425,000. When armament and superstructure are added, the price will more than double, and she'll be the world's most powerful fighting ship, a giant for her time. More than 600 feet, 2 football fields in length. Her 4 turrets will mount 12 14-inch guns, each able to hurl a nearly 2,000-pound projectile at targets 20 miles away. In less than 25 years, she will become forever etched in American memory. The battle cry will be, "Remember Pearl Harbor." What it will mean to many is, remember the Arizona. In 1916, escorted by harbor tugs and now fully outfitted, Arizona heads for the open ocean under the command of Captain John D. McDonald. And as the Arizona begins her stately passage, future Navy Ensign Joseph Langdell is an infant in Vermont. And half a world away in a small country town in Japan, a baby is born who will become this typical schoolboy, future Navy Lieutenant Zenji Abe. 2 officers to be, a proud new fighting ship, and a rapidly changing world that will force them together. This is Joe Langdell today, here at the Royal Hawaiian Hotel, where he spent much of his off-duty time in 1941. Joe shares some memories.
As a kid, I always wanted to be a naval officer. And it worked out through this, what we call the V7 program. Late in 1940, they started asking for college graduates that wanted to join the Navy. So I went through the procedure and became a midshipman at Northwestern University in Chicago. I think I was about the first 1,000 naval officers that went through this particular program, and there were some 20,000 before the war was over.
Zenji Abe followed a different path to earn his commission. Selected early in his school years, Abe attended the academy at Etajima, Japan's equivalent of Aranapolis. The navies of the world agreed. The battleship was the key to supremacy. But a brash Air Corps brigadier general argued that the future lay in air power. Billy Mitchell aroused the ire of his superiors by appealing to the public when officials refused to hear his arguments. Finally, he was given the opportunity to demonstrate his theory on July 29, 1921, off the Virginia Capes. His target? The captured World War I German battleship, the Ostfriesland. Before an audience of high-ranking American officers and invited observers from other countries, including Japan, Mitchell proved his point. The admirals still scoffed at his ideas. The Japanese observers, however, took careful notice. They believed that Mitchell had redesigned the principle of naval warfare. Frustrated and facing disciplinary action for outspoken support of air supremacy, Billy Mitchell resigned his commission in 1925. In 1936, he died. In 1946, after the war that proved so painfully that all his predictions had been correct, Billy Mitchell was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. As for the Arizona, she was a gleaming example of modern technology, a proud ship and a proud crew with a camaraderie that's unique to men at sea. But to be a gleaming example requires someone to keep it that way. H.R. Strong, now a resident of Glen Eden Beach, Oregon, served aboard the Arizona from 1936 to 1941. He shared one of his memories.
We learned all about deck work, to withstand seawater, to shining what seemed like miles of brass, railings, portholes, you name it. Also, the never-ending chore of scraping and repainting. I used to think that the Arizona must be the cleanest and most repainted ship in the whole Navy. Now I know that it was necessary for upkeep. Besides the fact they worked at keeping us all busy. An old adage, busy boys are better boys.
Recently, Arizona survivor Jim Vlock of Anaheim, California, hosted a small reunion of former crew members. One who joined the Arizona in 1924, Horatio Nelson Warren, now 86 years old, tells of a different kind of busy boys on the old ship.
The fleet went east, in January, right after New Year's Day in January 1924. We all went through the canal, and we went to the Virgin Islands. And we maneuvered around down there for several weeks. And then we all went to, well, not all, but several of the battleships. Went to New York for rest and recreation. And we anchored in the Hudson River, and while we were there, the ship was open to one and all. And of course, the sailors brought lots of women aboard, and they had pianos in the gun casemates, and the floors were slick as slick could be. The dancing was good. We left, we were there 10 days. And we went back to the Virgin Islands for a short time, and then came back through the canal. And while we were anchored on the west side of the canal, getting ready to get underway for Los Angeles port, they found this woman. And while he was leaning over drinking, he looked over to the side, and the person next to him smiled, and they had their drink, and this fella came in the radio shack, and he said, "I'll swear to Christ, I just saw a woman I danced with in New York." But then they started the investigation. And we were all called to quarters. And you had to stay there, though, except for those on watch. If you had to go to the can, you stepped through a door, you had a show by whether you were male or female. And so everything was more or less quiet until we got to Bremerton, and then they gave general reports to 32 that they had evidence on.
There were other more appropriate sports for off-duty recreation. Joe Viverito, a crew member from 1936 until 1941, has that chapter of life aboard.
From 36 to 40, it wasn't all work. It wasn't all fun. I mean, this is a ship, and it was a home to us. But in the Navy itself, we had 12 battleships in the Navy. And those 12 battleships were each like a city. They had their own water supplies, they had their own supply officers, everything. It was just like an independent city. And the captain, he was the mayor, except he was captain of the Navy. Every battleship was involved in all kinds of sports. I was on the football team. We had the wellboat races, we had sailing races, we had basketball, boxing, wrestling. All of these are part of the activities of the Navy before the war. In addition to that, we had battle exercises. We had gun drills. We had to go out and shoot. The anti-aircraft guns, for example, shot at targets, airplanes towing a target. The battleships would shoot on the surface of the target as far away as necessary. We had damage control drills. So between all of these activities, sports, you got a certain number of points. And at the end of the year, the ship that had the most points got to fly the meatball. The meatball was nothing but a flag that was flown up at the foremast, but that was the top ship in the Navy for that year.
Back in the gardens of the Royal Hawaiian Hotel, Joe Langdell recalls life aboard.
Life aboard was very pleasant. Even though we were beginning to know we were getting into war, it was a good crew. I've talked to sailors that were on the ship during the Depression in 1932, 1933, and in those years, and it was home. And during the Depression, there was no work, so some of these boys joined the Navy, and this was the only home they ever knew, or really ever knew.
A lot of them, a lot of the people on there considered the ship their home, and tried to stay on for cruise after cruise.
They had a chief machinist mate that did 20 years in the center engine room on Arizona, his entire naval career.
Couldn't have been treated better.
Chow?
Yeah, chow was excellent.
Good, excellent.
Excellent.
Except you knew every Wednesday and Saturday morning for breakfast you had beans
Banana and cornbread.
and cornbread.
I remember that I pulled an oar in the race boat, and we had a special mess.
Yeah.
Well,
For all the athletes, during the season, they had their athletic messes. And the athletes tipped well, so the guys were always happy to be mess cooks for the athlete messes.
They tipped.
Oh, yeah, oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Every payday, on the whole division,
Yeah.
they tipped the mess cooks.
Tipped the
You
mess
feed, you feed 20 men, that'd be $20. And then you got $5 a month extra for mess cooking for carrying your white uniforms. A good mess cook could go and buy some A1 sauce to put on the table, you know, and this sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, little extras like
Good mess
that.
cook got
yeah.
extra tip.
Sure. And at 8 o'clock in the evening, you'd have hammocks, okay?
Yeah, right.
Then you're allowed to go over to the hammock netting and break out your hammock and string it up,
Yeah.
trice it up for the night.
Yeah.
And then everybody'd stand and face aft and they'd just say a little prayer. That was part of the routine.
And I slept with my hammock rigged inside the forward cage mast all the time I was aboard that ship. Slept out in the open.
That kept you in the air.
Yeah, it kept me out in the open air. Otherwise, I would have to sleep on the third deck.
In connection with my comment earlier about the Arizona being a home for a lot of the crew, the Park Service has adopted a policy that the ones who were physically on board on December 7th can apply to them, and when they pass away, their ashes can be interred in Turret 4. The others, out of that 334 survivors who are not physically aboard, they can apply and have their ashes scattered above the ship. So that's another case where a lot of them are applying to return to their home.
In 1931, President Herbert Hoover embarks on a goodwill tour of the Caribbean. His choice of ship, the USS Arizona. In these official U.S. Navy films, Hoover and the presidential party are welcomed aboard. Meetings are held during his daily constitutional walks on deck, and at the first port of call, the presidential flag at the topmast, Hoover and the entire crew pose for a photo. In these rare shots of the Arizona at sea, the president's mail is delivered by Navy airship. These shots of the Arizona during fleet exercises north of Hawaii show that it was not always such smooth sailing. Then in 1934, Hollywood beckoned, and not even the Arizona could resist the temptation to become a star. Back in California, she became the leading lady in a Warner Brothers production called Here Comes the Navy. Her leading men? James Cagney and Pat O'Brien, along with Frank McHugh, who spent countless hours posing with the crew. Today, Joe Langdell travels once more his old path, through the hotel to Waikiki Beach, but it just isn't the same.
Times have changed. 49 years ago, the barbed wire was on the beach, and we used to come here and swim. The government took the hotel over as for rest and recreation, and before that, we'd come up here all the time. Just remember, just remarkable how times change. People swimming on the beach now, just like they did before the war. We like to come here and reminisce every 5 years about what we did way back in 1941. The memories will live forever.
Joe's first months aboard the Arizona, like all the junior officers aboard, were spent in training. His residence address, shown here on his driver's license, USS Arizona, Pearl Harbor. An ironic portent of things to come is this ship's movie announcement, August 3rd, 1941. That uncertain feeling. Part of that feeling was due to the training that Zenji Abe was receiving from the Imperial Japanese Navy. New techniques of air attack were being developed. This is Zenji's promotion to full lieutenant. But this document was his most treasured, his application for marriage. Each of those red marks is a stamp of approval, 34 in all, from the appropriate official. Having been deemed acceptable as the wife of a naval officer, Zenji and Kuniko were married. His son, Shuichiro, was born soon after. In the hills above Honolulu lies the area known as Kamehameha Heights. It offers an excellent view of the harbor. The view was even better in 1941 when Ensign Yoshikawa of the Japanese embassy staff became a regular customer here at the Natsunoya Tea House. From these windows, Yoshikawa was able to keep accurate track of the comings and goings of the U.S. Pacific Fleet. Unknown to the Japanese, U.S. intelligence had broken their code, and a number of transmissions between Honolulu and Tokyo were intercepted. Here are just a few. September 24th, from Tokyo. Report on ships present and their positions. The message reached Washington on October 6th. Early October. Yoshikawa reports an improved grid system for plotting ship locations at Pearl Harbor. On November 25th, the Japanese fleet sails for Hawaii. There is still no definite order to launch an attack. This photo of Lieutenant Zenji Abe was taken aboard the carrier Akagi as it sailed for Hawaii. All is ready. They wait for orders to begin the attack. December 2nd, 1941, Tokyo to Hawaii. Are there any barrage balloons over Pearl Harbor? Are torpedo nets in use? Also December 2nd, from Tokyo. We request daily updates of ships at Pearl Harbor. This message took 28 days to be processed by U.S. intelligence. December 3rd, Yoshikawa to Tokyo. There is considerable opportunity left for a surprise attack. Message intercepted and decoded by the U.S. after the attack. In Washington, expecting a declaration of war by Japan, intelligence learns that the Japanese ambassador is ordered to deliver an important message to the Secretary of State by 1 p.m. December 7th. That would make it early morning Hawaii time. That information never reached the U.S. command in Hawaii. 4 a.m. December 7th. The minesweeper Castor encounters a submarine near the harbor defenses. 6:51 a.m., the captain of the destroyer Ward reports the sinking of a submarine. 7:25 a.m., the Monaghan is ordered out of port to assist the Ward. 7:55 a.m., the first bomb drops, and the Japanese Navy will somehow achieve a complete surprise. The Japanese fleet has reached its launch position approximately 250 miles north of Hawaii. Admiral Yamamoto radioed this message to the fleet. The moment has arrived. The rise or fall of our empire is at stake. At 6:20 a.m. Hawaii time, the first of 353 planes was launched. 3 types of aircraft were in the attack. The famous Zero fighter plus torpedo and dive bombers. Lieutenant Abe flies his dive bomber off the deck of the Akagi. American carriers are the main target, but there are none in port. The high-altitude bombers and torpedo planes will attack the other combat vessels. Dive bombers and Zeros are assigned targets on the ground. Abe's assignment is to deliver a 260-kilogram bomb on the reserve oil tanks. Smoke obscures his view, and the Arizona lies straight in his path. He makes his decision. The bomb is too light to cause serious damage, but Petty Officer Noburo Kanai drops his armor-piercing bomb, a 1,760-pound naval shell. The missile pierces the decks forward and explodes in the powder magazine. The blast cracks her spine. She lurches out of the water, her insides a twisted wreck, and plunges to the bottom. Over 1,100 members of her crew die with her. Pearl Harbor is an inferno. The U.S. Pacific Fleet is decimated. After the attack, Lieutenant Abe poses with the dive bomber he flew at Pearl Harbor. And he received this commendation signed personally by Admiral Yamamoto. Ensign Joe Langdell's duties after the attack were much less pleasant.
No, but after the attack, and several days later, it became my job to take a crew of about 20 sailors, motor whale boats, and we went over to the Arizona, and we removed all of the bodies that were above the waterline. It was a very gruesome task. Some of them were in the way up on the tower way up there, and we got them out, and they were taken to wherever they were taken and were buried. The ship was afire, and it stayed hot for several days, so we had to wait until the ship was cool enough so that we could remove their bodies and give them proper respect.
The Japanese sent 5 of their new 2-man submarines into the Pearl Harbor attack. All 5 were lost. For some reason, this propaganda film made after the attack gave the midget subs credit for sinking the Arizona. 9 of the 10 men died. 1 man was captured after his sub went aground, and he became the first Japanese prisoner of war. To keep the myth of submarine supremacy alive, the Japanese government published a poster of the 9 dead submariners. They called them the 9 Young Gods. Missing from the honored group of 9 young gods, the 1 man who surrendered. This propaganda film may have served to fire the flames of patriotism in Japan, but the sinking of the Arizona and the horrifying loss of life fired an even stronger flame in America with the slogan, "Remember Pearl Harbor." Two weeks later, over Wake Island, Marine fighter pilots with only 4 Grumman Wildcats in use struck a revenge blow for the Arizona. Bombardier Noburo Kanai, the man who dropped the fatal bomb, dies in the wreckage of his plane on the Wake Island beach. At Pearl Harbor, the Japanese lost 29 planes, 55 airmen. U.S. losses were 2,403 killed, 188 aircraft destroyed, and 18 ships sunk or seriously damaged. The battleship Arizona, designation BB-39, born July 29, 1915, died in battle December 7, 1941. This is how she appeared in early 1942 prior to salvage. Many of her guns were removed to other ships. 2 entire turrets were mounted in the Hawaii Hills as a defense against Japanese invasion. They were never used and later cut up for scrap. Some bodies were removed during regular salvage operations, during which 1 Navy diver lost his life. Wartime priority demanded that most efforts be applied to those ships that could be returned to service. And because of the passage of time, it was determined that identification of remains would be impossible. The Navy designated the Arizona a grave, and the crewmen that remain aboard are considered buried at sea. In 1945, on the day the war ended, this is how she appeared. A workman's shed is erected on her deck. In the 1950s, much of the superstructure still remained above water and was designated as a temporary memorial. Part of the superstructure was removed to make room for the present memorial, and those parts of the Arizona that were removed lie rusting on a hill above Pearl Harbor. In 1962, this memorial was built to honor the ship and the nearly 1,000 men still entombed aboard. After Pearl Harbor, Joe Langdell was assigned to destroyer duty in the South Pacific. He and his wife Libby were married in 1942. This is John Langdell, their first son. Joe ended the war as a lieutenant commander and became a representative for a furniture manufacturer. His baby John now outranks his dad as Commander John Langdell, United States Navy. Joe's other son, Ted, is a television reporter. Joe is retired and lives in Yuba City, California. Zenji Abe at Waikiki. On this piece of parachute cloth, which he wore as a scarf, he recorded his Pacific record. From right to left, Pearl Harbor, New Ireland, Port Darwin, Australia, Dutch Harbor, Alaska, Bougainville, Guadalcanal. Zenji also became a lieutenant commander and ended the war as a prisoner on Guam. Later, he became a colonel in the Japan Self-Defense Force and then president of a plastics firm. He is retired and lives in Tokyo. When Mr. Abe came to Honolulu, he had one very special request. In Japan, he's a member of the Hawaii Group, veterans of the air attack on Pearl Harbor. Only 16 are left alive, and each year on the anniversary, they pay for a memorial service to both the Japanese and Americans killed in the attack. Abe's request: film the memorial ceremony here at the Nishiren Mission so that he might bring it back to show his comrades who are unable to travel. In a touching half-hour service, the bishop offers prayers for the dead on both sides. August 1938. Lieutenant Abe is on the far left. Only 4 people in this group are still alive. This memorial tablet begins with a prayer and is dedicated first to the dead in all wars, and with special emphasis on those killed at Pearl Harbor. Abe carried this picture of his wife Kuniko and son Soichiro throughout the war. Both have died. This golden tablet is in memoriam to all who died at Pearl Harbor. Afterward, Abe reads the names of his fallen comrades from a book that resides permanently here at Nishiren, high in the hills, the very hills over which the bombers were routed on December 7th, 1941. Abe holds the memorial book for his living comrades to see back in Japan. His statement is a simple one, that he wanted very much to come to Hawaii to participate in this memorial service. Today, a half-century later, the unthinkable occurs, an event so extraordinary as to be beyond the imagination of either man in 1941. Two aging gentleman warriors meet again at Pearl Harbor for an eerie trip into the past, a short boat ride back in time to the most unforgettable day of their youth. They have an appointment with a lady and with history. Beneath this gleaming marble monument lies the shattered, rusting hulk of the Arizona. Almost 1,000 of her crew still aboard just as they fell on December 7th, 1941. Still bleeding oil from her bunkers every 30 seconds for the past 50 years. Her broken sides heaving with the tidal surge. Lonely reminders of the attack litter her decks. Cups and crockery dropped hastily on the galley floor that Sunday morning. .50 caliber ammunition that never reached a gun barrel. Gaping battle wounds puncture her sides. Openings no one is allowed to enter out of respect for the dead. An escape ladder, useless now as it was on December 7th. And the lines that tied her to the jetty are no longer needed. The giant guns of turret number 1, now silent, still face some ghostly enemy. And back inside the turret, her faithful crew still at battle stations, awaiting a call to action.
Tears. It's just a hard thing for me to do is to come here, even to sit here, or to go out on that memorial.
Even 50 years later.
Even 50 years later, because there's those 1,102 could have been married or could get married. They could have had children. They could have had grandchildren, and those kids could be going out there.
Abe is respectful and stoic. Langdell, emotional and close to tears during the brief ride to the remains of the great ship. The silence is appropriate. The ship is now a tomb, and a time capsule containing not only their youth, but the smug innocence of a country. A member of the National Park Service, which maintains the memorial, accompanies the two men as they disembark. Footsteps echo faintly as they cross the structure which spans the wreck amidships. Approaching the memorial wall, a sense of military bearing is revived, and the two aging warriors straighten and begin to walk in step. Call of the dead. Nearly half of all Americans killed during the attack on Pearl Harbor were aboard the Arizona. In silent thought, each man searches his memory of that day. Joe Langdell had one request, that during this visit to the memorial, he be allowed to make any statement he wished, and that it would not be edited. Mr. Abe asked that he be allowed to make a brief statement. To those who perished along with their ship, I express my deep condolences and pray that all their souls may be at peace.
It is only by the grace of God that I stand here today to receive your wreath in memory of those 1,102 sailors entombed below, those buried in the Punch Bowl National Cemetery in Honolulu, and the remains of the 5 sailors in the number 4 barbette who have died since December 7th, 1941. They chose to join their shipmates. Casualties that day reached a total of about 1,181 men from the ship's complement of approximately 1,511 shipmates. 334 survived. It was my fortune to be the one junior officer chosen from about 50 for temporary duty ashore. I witnessed your attack from Ford Island about 100 yards from where we stand right this minute. Helpless, I watched your bomb sink the U.S. Arizona in 9 minutes. I speak only for myself I cannot and do not speak for my fellow shipmates or for those still living. Sentiment runs high, even today, against the Japanese commanders and against our former President, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and his advisors. The Hawaiian commanders were not given the clear picture of the situation as it existed on December 7th, 1941, or this needless loss of life could have been avoided. I appreciate your thoughtfulness in coming here to memorize our fallen heroes. Believe me, it took more courage on your part to present this wreath than it did for me to accept it. Today, nearly 50 years later, both of us must realize that we are a footnote in history. Each of us followed the orders of their commanders. Only future history can assess the wisdom of what was done here almost 50 years ago. But in memory of my shipmates, I thank you for coming here.
Then, in a traditional Hawaiian ceremony, Langdell and Abe exchange leis of flowers, and together drop them onto the remains of the ship as a tribute to the men entombed below. As the flowers float across the wreck and into the rain, the men are still silent as they strain to keep their tributes in sight for as long as possible. A dead ship, perhaps, but in another sense, immortal. Certainly in the memories of Joe Langdell and Zenji Abe, and the millions now living and yet to come, who will hopefully heed the lesson and echo the cry. Remember Pearl Harbor. Oil may be its lifeblood, its guns provide the muscle, but its crew is the heart of any ship. From 1915 to 1941, these are the faces of the Arizona. This profile of a dying ship was America's most shocking reminder of our entry into World War II. This is the story of that proud ship and the men who sailed her, and the parallel lives of two officers, one who served aboard and loved her, and one who struck the first blow in the assault that killed her. Two men whose destinies collide in a moment in history that changed the world forever. Now begins a story of heroism and devotion to duty that you were never taught in school. It begins and ends here at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, with the dedication of this monument to a name that stirs a faint sense of recognition, a slight jarring in some remote corner of the mind. The story of a faithful band of brothers who gloried in the name given to them by the very enemies they fought, the Buffalo Soldiers. In 1876, on these barren Montana hilltops, one of the most decisive battles of the Indian Wars was fought, the Battle of the Little Bighorn. This filming was planned to record a recent archaeological excavation of artifacts. What actually happened was one of the most exciting battlefield discoveries in the last 3 decades. The discovery of Custer's last trooper.
The officers and enlisted men have cheerfully endured many hardships and privations, and in the midst of great dangers, steadfastly maintained a most gallant and zealous devotion to duty. And they may well be proud of the record made and rest assured that the hard work undergone in the accomplishment of such important and valuable service to their country cannot fail, sooner or later, to meet